Chapter 7, Planet of the Damned by Harry Harrison. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Planet of the Damned by Harry Harrison. Chapter 7.
With the cool air and firmly packed sand underfoot, walking should have been easy. Lea spoiled that. The concussion seemed to have temporarily cut off the reasoning part of her brain, leaving a direct connection to her vocal cords. As she stumbled along, only half conscious, she mumbled all of her darkest fears that were better left unvoiced. Occasionally there was relevancy in her complaints. They would lose their way, never find the city, die of thirst, freezing, heat, or hunger. Interspersed and intertwined with these were fears from her past that still floated, submerged in the timeless ocean of her subconscious. Some Brion could understand, though he tried not to listen. Fears of losing credits, not getting the highest grade, falling behind, a woman alone in a world of men, leaving school, being lost, trampled among the nameless hordes that struggled for survival in the crowded city-states of Earth. There were other things she was afraid of that made no sense to a man of Anvhar. Who were the Alkians that seemed to trouble her? What was Kanseri, Hadel, and Heidel? Who was Manston, whose name kept coming up over and over, each time accompanied by a little moan? Brion stopped and picked her up in both arms. With a sigh she settled against the hard width of his chest and was instantly asleep. Even with the additional weight he made better time now, and he stretched to his fastest kilometer-consuming stride to make a good use of these best hours. Somewhere on a stretch of gravel and shelving rock he lost the track of the sand car. He wasted no time looking for it. By carefully watching the glistening stars rise and set, he had made a good estimate of the geographic north. Dis didn't seem to have a pole star. However, a box-like constellation turned slowly around the invisible point of the pole. Keeping this positioned in line with his right shoulder guided him on the westerly course he needed. When his arms began to grow tired, he lowered Lea gently to the ground. She didn't wake. Stretching for an instant before taking up his burden again, Brion was struck by the terrible loneliness of the desert. His breath made a vanishing mist against the stars. All else was darkness and silence. How distant he was from his home, his people, his planet. Even the constellations of the night sky were different. He was used to solitude, but this was a loneliness that touched some deep-buried instinct. A shiver that wasn't from the desert cold touched lightly along his spine, prickling at the hairs on his neck. It was time to go on. He shrugged the disquieting sensations off and carefully tied Lea into the jacket he had been wearing. Slung like a pack on his back, it made the walking easier. The gravel gave way to sliding dunes of sand that seemed to continue to infinity. It was a painful, slipping climb to the top of each one, then an equally difficult descent to the black pooled hollow at the foot of the next. With the first lightening of the sky in the east he stopped, breath rasping in his chest, to mark his direction before the stars faded. One line scratched in the sand pointed due north. A second pointed out the course they should follow. When they were lined to his satisfaction, he washed his mouth out with a single swallow of water and sat on the sand next to the still form of the girl. Gold fingers of fire searched across the sky, wiping out the stars. It was magnificent. Brion forgot his fatigue in appreciation. There should be some way of preserving it. A quatrain would be best. Short enough to be remembered, yet requiring attention and skill to compact everything into it. He had scored high with his quatrains in the 20s. This would be a special one. Tained, his poetry mentor, would have to get a copy. "What are you mumbling about?" Lea asked, looking up at the craggy blackness of his profile against the reddening sky. "Poem," he said. "Shh, just a minute." It was too much for Lea, coming after the tension and dangers of the night. She began to laugh, laughing even harder when he scowled at her. Only when she heard the tinge of growing hysteria did she make an attempt to break off the laughter. The sun cleared the horizon, washing a sudden warmth over them. Lea gasped. "Your throat's been cut. You're bleeding to death." "Not really," he said, touching his fingertips lightly against the blood-clotted wound that circled his neck. "Just superficial." Depression sat on him as he suddenly remembered the battle and the death of the previous night. Lea didn't notice his face. She was busy digging into the pack he had thrown down. He had to use his fingers to massage and force away the grimace of pain that twisted his mouth. Memory was more painful than the wound. How easily he had killed 3 men. How close to the surface of the civilized man the animal dwelled. In countless matches he had used those holes, always drawing back from the exertion of the full killing power. They were part of a game, part of the Twenties. Yet when his friend had been killed he had become a killer himself. He believed in non-violence and the sanctity of life. Until the first test, when he had killed without hesitation. More ironic was the fact he really felt no guilt, even now. Shock at the change, yes, but no more than that. "Lift your chin," Lea said, brandishing the antiseptic applicator she had found in the medicine kit. He lifted his chin obligingly, and the liquid drew a cool, burning line across his neck. Antibio pills would do a lot more good, since the wound was completely clotted by now. But he didn't speak his thoughts aloud. For the moment Lea had forgotten herself in taking care of him. He put some of the antiseptic on her scalp bruise and she squeaked, pulling back. They both swallowed the pills. "That sun is hot already," Lea said, peeling off her heavy clothing. "Let's find a nice cool cave or an air-conditioned saloon to crawl into for the day." "Oh, I don't think there are any here. Just sand. We have to walk." "I know we have to walk," she interrupted. "There's no need for lecture about it. You're as seriously cubical as the Bank of Terra. Relax, count 10 and start again." Lea was making empty talk while she listened to the memory of hysteria tittering at the fringes of her brain. "No time for that. We have to keep going." Brion climbed slowly to his feet after stowing everything in the pack. When he sighted along his marker at the western horizon, he saw nothing to mark their course, only the marching dunes. He helped Lea to her feet and began walking slowly towards them. "Just hold on a second," Lea called after him. "Where do you think you're going?" "In that direction," he said, pointing. "I hoped there would be some landmarks, but there aren't. We'll have to keep on by dead reckoning. The sun will keep us pretty well on course. If we aren't there by night, the stars will be a better guide. All this on an empty stomach? How about breakfast? I'm hungry and thirsty." "No food." He shook the canteen that gurgled emptily. It had been only partially filled when he found it. "The water's low, and we'll need it later." "I need it now," she said shortly. "My mouth tastes like an unemptied ashtray and I'm as dry as paper." "Just a single swallow," he said after the briefest hesitation. "This is all we have." Lea sipped at it with her eyes closed in appreciation. Then he sealed the top and returned it to the pack without taking any himself. They were sweating as they started up the first dune. The desert was barren of life. They were the only things moving under that merciless sun. Their shadows pointed the way ahead of them, and as the shadows shortened, the heat rose. It had an intensity Lea had never experienced before. A physical weight that pushed at her with a searing hand. Her clothing was sodden with perspiration, and it trickled burning into her eyes. The light and heat made it hard to see, and she leaned on the immovable strength of Brion's arm. He walked on steadily, apparently ignoring the heat and discomfort. "I wonder if those things are edible, or store water." Brion's voice was a harsh rasp. Lea blinked and squinted at the leathery shape on the summit of the dune. Plant or animal, it was hard to tell. It was the size of a man's head, wrinkled and gray as dried out leather, knobbed with thick spines. Brion pushed it up with his toe, and they had a brief glimpse of a white roundness, like a shiny taproot going down into the dune. Then the thing contracted, pulling itself lower into the sand. At the same instant something thin and sharp lashed out through a fold in the skin, striking at Brion's boot and withdrawing. There was a scratch on the hard plastic, beaded with drops of green liquid. "Probably poison," he said, digging his toe into the sand. "This thing is too mean to fool with, without a good reason. Let's keep going." It was before noon when Lea fell down. She really wanted to go on, but her body wouldn't obey. The thin soles of her shoes were no protection against the burning sand, and her feet were lumps of raw pain. Heat hammered down, poured up from the sand, and swirled her in an oven of pain. The air she gasped in was molten metal that dried and cracked her mouth. Each pulse of her heart throbbed blood to the wound in her scalp, until it seemed her skull would burst with the agony. She had stripped down to the short tunic, in spite of Brion's insistence that she keep her body protected from the sun, and that clung to her, soaked with sweat. She tore at it in a desperate effort to breathe. There was no escape from the unending heat. Though the baked sand burned torture into her knees and hands, she couldn't rise. It took all her strength not to fall further. Her eyes closed and everything swirled in immense circles. Brion, blinking through slitted eyes, saw her go down. He lifted her and carried her again as he had the night before. The hot touch of her body shocked his bare arms. Her skin was flushed pink. The tunic was torn open, and one pointed breast rose and fell unevenly with the irregularity of her breathing. Wiping his palm free of sweat and sand, he touched her skin and felt the ominous hot dryness. Heat shock, all the symptoms, dry flushed skin, the ragged breathing, her temperature rising quickly as her body stopped fighting the heat and succumbed. There was nothing he could do here to protect her from the heat. He measured a tiny portion of the remaining water into her mouth and she swallowed convulsively. Her thin clothing was little protection from the sun. He could only take her in his arms and keep on towards the horizon. An outcropping of rock threw a tiny patch of shade and he walked towards it. The ground here, shielded from the direct rays of the sun, felt almost cool by contrast. Lea opened her eyes when he put her down, peering up at him through a haze of pain. She wanted to apologize to him for her weakness, but no words came from the dried membrane of her throat. His body above her seemed to swim back and forth in the heat waves, swaying like a tree in a high wind. Shock drove her eyes open, cleared her mind for an instant. He really was swaying. Suddenly she realized how much she had come to depend on the unending solidity of his strength, and now it was failing. All over his body the corded muscles contracted in ridges, striving to keep him erect. She saw his mouth pulled open by the taut cords of his neck, and the gaping silent scream that was more terrible than any sound. Then she herself screamed as his eyes rolled back, leaving only the empty white of the eyeballs staring terribly at her. He went over, back, down like a felled tree, thudding heavily on the sand. Unconscious or dead, she couldn't tell. She pulled limply at his leg, but couldn't drag his immense weight into the shade. Brion lay on his back in the sun, sweating. Lea saw this and knew he was still alive. Yet, what was happening? She groped for memory in the red haze of her mind, but could remember nothing from her medical studies that would explain this. On every square inch of his body the sweat glands seethed with sudden activity. From every pore oozed great globules of oily liquid, far thicker than normal perspiration. Brion's arms rippled with motion and Lea gasped, horrified as the hairs there writhed and stirred as though endowed with separate life. His chest rose and fell rapidly, deep gasping breaths racking his body. Lea could only stare through the dim redness of unreality and wonder if she were going mad before she died. A coughing fit broke the rhythm of his rasping breath, and when it was over his breathing was easier. The perspiration still covered his body, the individual beads touching and forming tiny streams that trickled down his body and vanished in the sand. He stirred and rolled onto his side, facing her. His eyes were open and normal now, as he smiled. "Didn't mean to frighten you. It caught me suddenly, coming at the wrong season and everything. It was a bit of a jar to my system. I'll get you some water now. There's still a bit left." "What happened? When you looked like that, when you fell?" "Take 2 swallows, no more," he said, holding the open canteen to her mouth. "Just summer change, that's all. It happens to us every year on Anvhar, only not that violently, of course. In the winter our bodies store a layer of fat under the skin for insulation, and sweating almost ceases completely. There are a lot of internal changes too. When the weather warms up, the process is reversed. The fat is metabolized and the sweat glands enlarge and begin working overtime as the body prepares for 2 months of hard work, heat, and little sleep. I guess the heat here triggered off the summer change early. You mean you've adapted to this terrible planet?" "Just about, though it does feel a bit warm. I'll need a lot more water soon, so we can't remain here. Do you think you can stand the sun if I carry you?" "No, but I won't feel any better staying here." She was lightheaded, scarcely aware of what she said. "Keep going, I guess, keep going." As soon as she was out of the shade of the rock, the sunlight burst over her again in a wave of hot pain. She fell unconscious at once. Brion picked her up and staggered forward. After a few yards he began to feel the pull of the sand. He knew he was reaching the end of his strength. He went on more slowly, and each dune seemed a bit higher than the one before. Giant sand-scoured rocks pushed through the dunes here, and he had to stumble around them. At the base of the largest of these monoliths was a straggling clump of knotted vegetation. He passed it by, then stopped as something tried to penetrate his heat-crazed mind. What was it? A difference. Something about these plants he hadn't noticed in any of the others he had passed during the day. It was almost like defeat to turn and push his clumsy feet backwards in his own footprints, to stand blinking helplessly at the plants. Yet they were important. Some of them had been cut off close to the sand, not broken by any natural cause, but cut sharply and squarely by a knife or blade of some sort. The cut plants were long dried and dead, but a tiny hope flared up in him. This was the first sign that other people were actually alive on this heat-blasted planet. And whatever the plants had been cut for, they might be of aid to him. Food, perhaps drink. His hands trembled at the thought as he dropped Lea heavily into the shade of the rock. She didn't stir. His knife was sharp, but most of the strength was gone from his hands. Breath rasping in his dried throat, he sawed at the thick stem, finally cutting it through. Raising up the shrub, he saw a thick liquid dripping from the severed end. He braced his hand against his leg so it wouldn't shake and spill, until his cupped palm was full of sap. It was wet, even a little cool as it evaporated. Surely it was mostly life-giving water. He had a moment's misgiving as he raised it to his lips, and instead of drinking it, merely touched it with the tip of his tongue. At first nothing, then a searing pain. It stabbed deep into his throat and choked him. His stomach heaved and he vomited bitter bile. On his knees, fighting the waves of pain, he lost body fluid he vitally needed. Despair was worse than the pain. The plant juice must have some use. There must be a way of purifying it or neutralizing it. But Brion, a stranger on this planet, would be dead long before he found out how to do this. Weakened by the cramps that still tore at him, he tried not to realize how close to the end he was. Getting the girl on his back seemed an impossible task, and for an instant he was tempted to leave her there. Yet, even as he considered this, he shouldered her leaden weight, and once more went on. Each footstep an effort. He followed his own track up the dune. Painfully he forced his way to the top, and looked at the Disan standing a few feet away. They were both too surprised by the sudden encounter to react at once. For a breath of time they stared at each other, unmoving. When they reacted, it was the same defense of fear. Brion dropped the girl, bringing the gun up from the holster in the return of the same motion. The Disan jerked a bell tube from his waistband and raised it to his mouth. Brion didn't fire. A dead man had taught him how to train his empathic sense, and to trust it. In spite of the fear that wanted him to jerk the trigger, a different sense read the unvoiced emotions of the native Disan. There was fear there, and hatred. Welling up around these was a strong desire not to commit violence, this time to communicate instead. Brion felt and recognized all this in a fraction of a second. He had to act instantly to avoid a tragic happening. A jerk of his wrist threw the gun to one side. As soon as it was gone, he regretted its loss. He was gambling their lives on an ability he was still not sure of. The Disan had the tube to his mouth when the gun hit the ground. He held the pose, unmoving, thinking. Then he accepted Brion's action and thrust the tube back into his waistband. "Do you have any water?" Brion asked, the guttural Disan words hurting his throat. "I have water," the man said. He still didn't move. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" "We're from off planet. We had an accident. We want to go to the city." The Disan looked at the unconscious girl and made his decision. Over one shoulder he wore one of the green objects that Brion remembered from the Solido. He pulled it off and the thing writhed slowly in his hands. It was alive, a green length a meter long, like a nodule section of a thick vine. One end flared out into a petal-like formation. The Disan took a hook-shaped object from his waist and thrust it into the petaled orifice. When he turned the hook in a quick motion, the length of green writhed and curled around his arm. He pulled something small and dark out and threw it to the ground, extending the twisting green shape towards Brion. "Put your mouth to the end and drink," he said. Lea needed the water more, but he drank first, suspicious of the living water source. A hollow below the writhing petals was filling with straw-colored water from the fibrous, reedy interior. He raised it to his mouth and drank. The water was hot and tasted swampy. Sudden sharp pains around his mouth made him jerk the thing away. Tiny glistening white barbs projected from the petals, pink-tipped now with his blood. Brion swung towards the Disan angrily, and stopped when he looked at the other man's face. His mouth was surrounded by many small white scars. "The Vade does not like to give up its water, but it always does," the man said. Brion drank again, then put the Vade to Lea's mouth. She moaned without regaining consciousness, her lips seeking reflectively for the life-saving liquid. When she was satisfied, Brion gently drew the barbs from her flesh and drank again. The Disan hunkered down on his heels and watched them expressionlessly. Brion handed back the Vade and held some of the clothes so that Lea was in their shade. He settled to the same position as the native and looked closely at him. Squatting immobile on his heels, the Disan appeared perfectly comfortable under the flaming sun. There was no trace of perspiration on his naked brown skin. Long hair fell to his shoulders, and startlingly blue eyes stared back at Brion from deep-set sockets. The heavy kilt around his loins was the only garment he wore. Once more the Vade rested over his shoulder, still stirring unhappily. Around his waist was the same collection of leather, stone, and brass objects that had been in the Solido. Two of them now had meaning to Brion: the tube and mouthpiece, a blowgun of some kind, and the specially shaped tube for opening the Vade. He wondered if the other strangely formed things had equally practical functions. If you accepted them as artifacts with a purpose, not barbaric decorations, you had to accept their owner as something more than the crude savage he resembled. "My name is Brion. And you? You may not have my name. Why are you here? To kill my people?" Brion forced away the memory of last night. Killing was just what he had done. Some expectancy in the man's manner, some sensed feeling of hope, prompted Brion to speak the truth. "I am here to stop your people from being killed. I believe in the end of the war." "Prove it." "Take me to the Cultural Relationships Foundations in the city and I'll prove it. I can do nothing here in the desert except die." For the first time there was emotion on the Disan's face. He frowned and muttered something to himself. There was a fine beading of sweat above his eyebrows now as he fought an internal battle. Coming to a decision, he rose, and Brion stood too. "Come with me. I'll take you to Hovedstad. But first you will tell me. Are you from Nyjord?" "No." The nameless Disan merely grunted and turned away. Brion shouldered Lea's unconscious body and followed him. They walked for 2 hours, the Disan setting a cruel pace before they reached a wasteland of jumbled rock. The native pointed to the highest tower of sand-eroded stone. "Wait near this," he said. "Someone will come for you." He watched while Brion placed the girl's still body in the shade and passed over the Vade for the last time. Just before leaving he turned back, hesitating. "My name is Ulv," he said. Then he was gone. Brion did what he could to make Lea comfortable, but it was very little. If she didn't get medical attention soon, she would be dead. Dehydration and shock were uniting to destroy her. Just before sunset he heard clanking and the throbbing whine of a sandcar's engine coming from the west. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8, Planet of the Damned by Harry Harrison. Read for LibriVox.org by Robbie Rogers. With each second the noise grew louder, coming their way. The track squeaked as the car turned around the rock spire, obviously seeking them out. A large carrier, big as a truck, it stopped before them in a cloud of its own dust, and the driver kicked the door open. "Get in here, and fast!" the man shouted. "You're letting in all the heat." He gunned the engine, ready to kick in the gears, and looked at them irritatedly. Ignoring the driver's nervous instructions, Brion carefully placed Lea on the rear seat before he pulled the door shut. The car surged forward instantly, a blast of icy air pouring from the air cooling vents. It wasn't cold in the vehicle, but the temperature was at least 40 degrees lower than the outer air. Brion covered Lea with all their extra clothing to prevent any further shock to her system. The driver, hunched over the wheel and driving with an intense speed, hadn't said a word to them since they had entered. Brion looked up as another man stepped from the engine compartment in the rear of the car. He was thin, harried looking, and he was pointing a gun. "Who are you?" he said, without a trace of warmth in his voice. It was a strange reception, but Brion was beginning to realize that this was a strange planet. The other man chewed at his lip nervously while Brion sat, relaxed and unmoving. He didn't want to startle him into pulling the trigger, and he kept his voice pitched low as he answered. "My name is Brandd. We landed from space 2 nights ago and have been walking in the desert ever since. Now, don't get excited and shoot the gun when I tell you this, but both Vian and Isle are dead." The man with the gun gasped, his eyes widened. The driver threw a single frightened look over his shoulder, then turned quickly back to the wheel. Brion's probe had hit its mark. If these men weren't from the Cultural Relationships Foundation, they at least knew a lot about it. It seemed safe to assume that they were CRF men. "When they were shot, the girl and I escaped. We were trying to reach the city and contact you. You are from the Foundation, aren't you?" "Yes, of course," the man said, lowering the gun. He stared glassy-eyed into space for a moment, nervously working his teeth against his lip. Startled at his own inattention, he raised the gun again. "If you're Brandd, then there's something I want to know." Rummaging in his breast pocket with his free hand, he brought out a yellow message form. He moved his lips as he reread the message. Now, answer me, if you can, what are the last 3 events in the—" he took a quick look at the paper again, "in the Twenties?" "Chess finals, rifle prone position, and fencing playoffs. Why?" The man grunted and slid the pistol back into its holder, satisfied. "I'm Faussel," he said, and waved the message at Brion. "This is Ihjel's last will and testament, relayed to us by the Nyjord blockade control. He thought he was going to die, and he sure was right. Passed his job on to you. You're in charge. I was Mervv's second in command until he was poisoned. I was supposed to work for Ihjel, and now I guess I'm yours. At least until tomorrow, when we'll have everything packed and get off this hell planet." "What do you mean tomorrow?" Brion asked. "It's 3 days to deadline and we still have a job to do." Faussel had dropped heavily into one of the seats, and he sprang to his feet again, clutching the seat back to keep his balance in the swaying car. 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 minutes, what difference does it make? His voice rose shrilly with each word, and he had to make a definite effort to master himself before he could go on. "Look, you don't know anything about this. You just arrived and that's your bad luck. My bad luck is being assigned to this death trap and watching the depraved and filthy things the natives do, and trying to be polite to them even when they're killing my friends. And those Nyjord bombers up there with their hands on the triggers. One of those bombardiers is going to start thinking about home and about cobalt bombs down here. He's going to press that button, deadline or no deadline." "Sit down, Faussel, sit down and take a rest." There was sympathy in Brion's voice, but also the firmness of an order. Faussel swayed for a second longer, then collapsed. He sat with his cheek against the window, eyes closed. A pulse throbbed visibly in his temple and his lips worked. He had been under too much tension for too long a time. This was the atmosphere that hung heavily in the air at the CRF building when they arrived. Despair and defeat. The doctor was the only one who didn't share this mood as he bustled Lea off to the clinic with prompt efficiency. He obviously had enough patients to keep his mind occupied. With the others, the feeling of depression was unmistakable. From the instant they had driven through the automatic garage door, Brion had swum in this miasma of defeat. It was omnipresent and hard to ignore. As soon as he had eaten, he went with Faussel into what was to have been Ihjel's office. Through the transparent walls he could see the staff packing the records, crating them for shipment. Faussel seemed less nervous now that he was no longer in command. Brion rejected any idea he had of letting the man know that he himself was only a novice in the Foundation. He was going to need all the authority he could muster, since they would undoubtedly hate him for what he was going to do. "Better take notes of this, Faussel, and have it typed. I'll sign it." The printed word always carried more weight. "All preparations for leaving are to be stopped at once. Records are to be returned to the files. We are going to stay here just as long as we have clearance from the Nyjorders. If this operation is unsuccessful, we will all leave together when the time expires. We will take whatever personal baggage we can carry by hand. Everything else stays here. Perhaps you don't realize that we are here to save a planet, not file cabinets full of papers." Out of the corner of his eye he saw Faussel flush with anger. "As soon as that is typed, bring it back. And all the reports as to what has been accomplished on this project. That will be all for now." Faussel stamped out, and a minute later Brion saw the shocked, angry looks from the workers in the outer office. Turning his back to them, he opened the drawers in the desk, one after another. The top drawer was empty, except for a sealed envelope. It was addressed to Winner Ihjel. Brion looked at it thoughtfully, then ripped it open. The letter inside was handwritten. Ihjel, I've had the official word that you are on the way to relieve me, and I am forced to admit I feel only an intense satisfaction. You've had the experience on these outlaw planets and can get along with the odd types. I've been specializing in research for the last 20 years, and the only reason I was appointed planetary supervisor on Nyjord was because of the observation and application facilities. I'm the research type, not the office type. No one has ever denied that. You're going to have trouble with the staff, so you had better realize that they are all compulsory volunteers. Half are clerical people from my staff. The others, a mixed bag of whoever was close enough to be pulled in on this crash assignment. It developed so fast we never saw it coming, and I'm afraid we have done little or nothing to stop it. We can't get access to the natives here, not in the slightest. It's frightening. They don't fit. I've done Poisson distributions on a dozen different factors, and none of them can be equated. The Pareto extrapolations don't work. Our field men can't even talk to the natives, and 2 have been killed trying. The ruling class is unapproachable, and the rest just keep their mouths shut and walk away. I'm going to take a chance and try to talk to Lig Magda. Perhaps I can make him see sense. I doubt if it will work, and there is a chance he will try violence with me. The nobility here are very prone to violence. If I get back all right, you won't see this note. Otherwise, goodbye, Isle. Try to do a better job than I did. Aston Merv. P.S. There is a problem with the staff. They are supposed to be saviors, but without exception they all loathe the Disans. I'm afraid I do too. Brion ticked off the relevant points in the letter. He had to find some way of discovering what the Pareto extrapolations were without uncovering his own lack of knowledge. The staff would vanish in 5 minutes if they knew how new he was at the job. Poisson distributions made more sense. It was used in physics as the unchanging probability of an event that would be true at all times, such as the number of particles that would be given off by a lump of radioactive material during a short period. From the way Merv used it in his letter, it looked as if the societies people had found measurable applications in societies and groups, at least on other planets. None of the rules seemed to be working on Dis. Isle had admitted that, and Merv's death had proven it. Brion wondered who this Lig Magda was who appeared to have killed Merv. A forged cough broke through Brion's concentration, and he realized that Faussel had been standing in front of his desk for some minutes. Brion looked up and mopped perspiration from his face. "Your air conditioner seems to be out of order," Faussel said. "Should I have the mechanic look at it?" "There's nothing wrong with the machine. I'm just adapting to Dis's climate. What else do you want, Faussel?" The assistant had a doubting look that he didn't succeed in hiding. He also had trouble believing the literal truth. He placed the small stack of file folders on the desk. "These are the reports to date, everything we have uncovered about the Disans. It's not very much, but considering the antisocial attitudes on this lousy planet world, it's the best we could do." A sudden thought hit him and his eyes narrowed slyly. "It can't be helped, but some of the staff have been wondering out loud about that native that contacted us. How did you get him to help you? We've never gotten to first base with these people, and as soon as you land you have one working for you. You can't stop people from thinking about it, you being a newcomer and a stranger. After all, it looks a little odd." He broke off in mid-sentence as Brion looked at him in cold fury. "I can't stop people from thinking about it, but I can stop them from talking. Our job is to contact the Disans and stop this suicidal war. I have done more in one day than you all have done since you arrived. I have accomplished this because I am better at my work than the rest of you. That is all the information any of you are going to receive. You are dismissed." White with anger, Faussel turned on his heel and stamped out, to spread the word about what a slave driver the new director was. They would then all hate him passionately, which was just the way he wanted it. He couldn't risk exposure as the tyro he was, and perhaps a new emotion, other than disgust and defeat, might jar them into a little action. They certainly couldn't do any worse than they had been doing. It was a tremendous amount of responsibility. For the first time since setting foot on this barbaric planet, Brion had time to stop and think. He was taking an awful lot upon himself. He knew nothing about this world, nor about the powers involved in the conflict. Here he sat pretending to be in charge of an organization he had first heard about only a few weeks earlier. It was a frightening situation. Should he slide out from under? There was just one possible answer, and that was no. Until he found someone else who could do better, he seemed to be the one best suited for the job. And Ihjel's opinion had to count for something. Brienne had felt the surety of the man's conviction that Brion was the only one who might possibly succeed in this difficult spot. Let it go at that. If he had any qualms, it would be best to put them behind him. Aside from everything else, there was a primary bit of loyalty involved. Ihjel had been an Anvharian and a winner. Maybe it was a provincial attitude to hold in this big universe. Anvhar was certainly far enough away from here. But honor is very important to a man who must stand alone. He had a debt to Ihjel, and he was going to pay it off. Once the decision had been made, he felt easier. There was an intercom on the desk in front of him, and he leaned with a heavy thumb on the button labeled Faussel. Yes? Even through the speaker the man's voice was cold with ill-concealed hatred. Who is Lig Magda? And did the former director have returned from seeing him? Magda is a title that means, roughly, noble or lord. Lig Magda is the local overlord. He has an ugly stone heap of a building just outside the city. He seems to be the mouthpiece for a group of magter that are pushing this idiotic war. As to your second question, I have to answer yes and no. We found Director Merv's head outside the door next morning with all the skin gone. We knew who it was because the doctor identified the bridge work in his mouth. Do you understand? All pretense of control had vanished, and Faussel almost shrieked the last words. They were all close to cracking up. If he was any example, Brion broke in quickly. That will be all, Faussel. Just get word to the doctor I would like to see him as soon as I can. He broke the connection and opened the first of the folders. By the time the doctor called, he had skimmed the reports and was reading the relevant ones in greater detail. Putting on his warm coat, he went through the outer office. The few workers still on duty turned their backs in frigid silence. Dr. Steen had a pink and shiny bald head that rose above a thick black beard. Brion liked him at once. Anyone with enough firmness of mind to keep a beard in this climate was a pleasant exception after what he had met so far. How's the new patient, Doctor? Steen combed his beard with stubby fingers before answering. Diagnosis, heat syncope. Prognosis, complete recovery. Condition fair considering the dehydration and extensive sunburn. I've treated the burns and a saline drip is taking care of the other. She just missed going into heat shock. I have her under sedation now. I'd like to have her up and helping me tomorrow morning. Could she do this with stimulants or drugs? She could, but I don't like it. There might be side factors, perhaps long-standing debilitation. It's a chance. A chance we will have to take. In less than 70 hours this planet is due for destruction. In attempting to avert that tragedy, I'm expendable, as is everyone else here. Agreed? The doctor grunted deep in his beard and looked Brion's immense frame up and down. Agreed, he said, almost happily. It is a distinct pleasure to see something besides black defeat around here. I'll go along with you. Well, you can help me right now. I've checked the personnel roster and discovered that out of the 28 people working here, there isn't a physical scientist of any kind other than yourself. A scruffy bunch of button pushers and theoreticians, not worth a damn for field work, the whole bunch of them. The doctor toed the floor switch on a waste receptacle and spat into it with feeling. Then I'm going to depend on you for some straight answers, Brion said. This is an unstandard operation, and the standard techniques just don't begin to make sense. Even Poisson distributions and Pareto extrapolations don't apply here. Steen nodded agreement, and Brion relaxed a bit. He had just relieved himself of his entire knowledge of societics, and it had sounded authentic. The more I look at it, the more I believe that this is a physical problem. Something to do with the exotic and massive adjustments the Disans have made to this hellish environment. Could this tie up in any way with their absolutely suicidal attitudes towards the cobalt bombs? Could it? Could it? Dr. Steen paced the floor rapidly on his stocky legs, twining his fingers behind his back. "You're bloody well right it could. Someone is thinking at last and not just punching bloody numbers into a machine and sitting and scratching his behind while waiting for the screen to light up with the answers. Do you know how Disans exist?" Brion shook his head. "The fools here think it's disgusting, but I call it fascinating. They have found ways to join a symbiotic relationship with the life forms on this planet, even a parasitic relationship. You must realize that living organisms will do anything to survive. Castaways at sea will drink their own urine in need for water. Disgust at this is the only attitude of the overprotected who have never experienced extreme thirst or hunger. Well, here on Dis you have a planet of castaways." Steen opened the door of the pharmacy. "This talk of thirst makes me dry." With economical, efficient motions he poured grain alcohol into a beaker, thinned it with distilled water, and flavored it with some crystals from a bottle. He filled 2 glasses and handed Brion one. It didn't taste bad at all. "What do you mean by parasitic, Doctor? Aren't we all parasites of the lower life forms? Meat animals, vegetables and such?" No, you miss the point. I speak of parasitic in the exact meaning of the word. You must realize that to a biologist there is no real difference between parasitism, symbiosis, mutualism, biontagasi, commensalism. Stop, Brion said. "Those are just meaningless sounds to me. If that is what makes this planet tick, I'm beginning to see why the rest of the staff has that lost feeling. It is just a matter of degree of the same thing. Look, you have a kind of crustacean living in the lakes here. Very much like an ordinary crab. It has large claws in which it holds anemones, tentacle sea animals with no power of motion. The crustacean waves these around to gather food and eats the pieces they capture that are too big for them. This is biontagasi, 2 creatures living and working together, yet each capable of existing alone. Now, this same crustacean has a parasite living under its shell, a degenerated form of a snail that has lost all powers of movement. A true parasite that takes food from its host body and gives nothing in return. Inside the snail's gut there's a protozoa that lives off the snail's ingested food. Yet this little organism is not a parasite, as you might think at first, but a symbiote. It takes food from the snail, but at the same time it secretes a chemical that aids in the snail's digestion of the food. Do you get the picture? All these life forms exist in a complicated interdependence." Brion frowned in concentration, sipping at the drink. "It's making some kind of sense now. Symbiosis, parasitism, and all the rest are just ways of describing variations of the same basic process of living together. And there is probably a grading and shading between some of these that makes the exact relationship hard to define." "Precisely. Existence is so difficult on this world that the competing forms have almost died out. There are still a few left, preying off the others. It was the cooperating and interdependent life forms that really won out in the race for survival. I say life forms with intent. The creatures here are mostly a mixture of plant and animal, like the lichens you have elsewhere. The Disans have a creature they call a vati that they use for water when traveling. It has rudimentary powers of motion from its animal part, yet uses photosynthesis and stores water like a plant. When the Disans drink from it, the thing taps their bloodstreams for food elements." "I know," Brion said dryly. "I drank from one. You can see my scars." "I'm beginning to comprehend now how the Disans fit into the physical pattern of their world, and I realize it must have all kinds of psychological effects on them. Do you think this has any effect on their social organization?" "An important one. But maybe I'm making too many suppositions now. Perhaps your researchers upstairs can tell you better. After all, this is their field." Brion had studied the reports on the social setup and not one word of them made sense. They were a solid maze of unknown symbols and cryptic charts. "Please continue, Doctor," he insisted. "The societic reports are valueless so far. There are factors missing. You're the only one I've talked to so far who can give me any intelligent reports or answers." "All right then, be it on your own head. The way I see it, you've got no society here at all. just a bunch of rugged individualists, each one for himself, getting nourishment from the other life forms of the planet. If they have a society, it's oriented towards the rest of the planetary life, instead of towards other human beings. Perhaps that's why your figures don't make sense. They're set up for human societies. In their relations with each other, these people are completely different. What about the magter, the upper class types who build castles and are causing all the trouble? I have no explanation, Dr. Steen admitted. My theories hold water and seem logical enough up to this point. But the magter are the exception, and I have no idea why. They're completely different from the rest of the Disans. Argumentative, bloodthirsty, looking for planetary conquest instead of peace. They aren't rulers, not in the real sense. They hold power because nobody else wants it. They grant mining concessions to off-worlders because they're the only ones with a sense of property. Perhaps I'm going out on a limb, but if you can find out why they are so different, you may be onto the clue to our difficulties. For the first time since his arrival, Brion began to feel a touch of enthusiasm, plus a sense of the remote possibility that there might even be a solution to the deadly problem. He drained his glass and stood up. I hope you'll wake your patient early, Doctor. You might be as interested in talking to her as I am. If what you told me is true, she could well be our key to the answer. She is Professor Leah Moore's, and she's just out of Earth with degrees in exobiology and anthropology, and has a head stuffed with vital facts. Wonderful, said Steen. I shall take care of the head, not only because it is so pretty, but because of the knowledge. Though we totter on the edge of atomic destruction, I have a strange feeling of optimism for the first time since I landed on this planet. End of chapter 8.
Chapter 9 of Planet of the Damned. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by November 8 Echo Victor Victor. Planet of the Damned by Harry Harrison. Chapter 9. The guard inside the front entrance of the Foundation building jumped at the thunderous noise and reached for his gun. He dropped his hand sheepishly when he realized it was only a sneeze, though a gargantuan one. Brienne came up sniffling, huddling down into his coat. "I'm going out before I catch pneumonia," he said. The guard saluted dumbly, and, after checking his proximity detector screens, he slipped out, and the heavy portal thudded shut behind him. The street was still warm from the heat of the day, and he sighed happily and opened his coat. This was partly a reconnaissance trip, and partly a way of getting warmed up. There was little else he could do in the building. The staff had long since retired. He had slept for a half an hour, and had waked refreshed and ready to work. All of the reports he could understand had been read and reread until they were memorized. He could use the time now, while the rest of them were asleep, to get better acquainted with the main city of Dis. As he walked the dark streets, he realized how alien the Disan way of life was to everything he knew. This city, Hovedstadt, literally meant main place in the native language. And that's all it was. It was only the presence of the off-worlders that made it into a city. Building after building, standing deserted, bore the names of mining companies, traders, space transporters. None of them was occupied now. Some still had lights burning, switched on by automatic apparatus. Others were as dark as the Disan structures. There weren't many of these native constructions, and they seemed out of place among the rammed earth and prefab off-world buildings. Brion examined one that was dimly illuminated by the light, on the corner of Vegan Smelters Limited. It consisted of a single large room, resting right on the ground. There were no windows, and the whole thing appeared to have been constructed of some sort of woven material plastered with stone-hard mud. Nothing was blocking the door, and he was thinking seriously of going in, when he became aware that he was being followed. It was only a slight noise, almost lost in the night. Normally, it would never have been noticed, but tonight Brion was listening with his entire body. Someone was behind him, swallowed up in the pools of darkness. Brion shrank back against the wall. There was very little chance this could be anyone but a Disan. He had a sudden memory of Merv's severed head, as it had been discovered outside the door. Isle had helped him train his empathetic sense, and he reached out with it. It was difficult working in the dark. He could be sure of nothing. Was he getting a reaction? Or just wishing for one? Why did it have a ring of familiarity to it? A sudden idea struck him. "Ulv," he said, very softly, "this is Brion." He crouched, ready for any attack. "I know," a voice said softly in the night. "Do not talk. Walk in the direction you were going before." Asking questions now would accomplish nothing. Brion turned instantly and did as he was bidden. The buildings grew further apart until he realized from the sand underfoot that he was back in the planet-wide desert. It could be a trap. He hadn't recognized the voice behind the whisper, yet he had to take this chance. A darker shape appeared in the dark night near him, and a burning hot hand touched his arm lightly. "I will walk ahead. Follow close behind me." The words were louder, and this time Brion recognized the voice. Without waiting for an answer, Ulv turned, and his dimly seen shape vanished into the darkness. Brion moved swiftly after him until they walked side by side over the rolling hills of sand. The sand merged into hard-baked ground, became cracked and scarred with rock-filled gullies. They followed a deepening gully that grew into a good-sized ravine. When they turned an angle of the ravine, Brion saw a weak yellow light coming from an opening in the hard dirt wall. Ulv dropped on all fours and vanished through the shoulder-wide hole. Brion followed him, trying to ignore the growing tension and unease he felt. Crawling like this, head down, he was terribly vulnerable. He tried to shrug off the feeling, mentally blaming it on tense nerves. The tunnel was short and opened into a larger chamber. A sudden scuffle of feet sounded at the same instant that a wave of empathetic hatred struck him. It took vital seconds to fight his way out of the trapping tunnel, to roll clear and bring his gun up. During those seconds he should have died. The Disan poised above him had the short-handled stone hammer raised to strike a skull-crushing blow. Ulv was clutching the man's wrist, fighting silently to keep the hammer from falling. Neither combatant said a word, the rasp of their calloused feet on the sand the only sound. Brion backed away from the struggling men, his gun centered on the stranger. The Disan followed him with burning eyes and dropped the hammer as soon as it was obvious the attack had failed. "Why did you bring him here?" he growled at Ulv. "Why didn't you kill him?" "He is here so we can listen to what he says, Gek. He is the one I told you of, that I found in the desert." "We listen to what he says and then we kill him," Gek said with a mirthless grin. The remark wasn't meant to be humorous, but was made in all seriousness. Brion recognized this and knew that there was no danger for the present moment. He slid the gun away and for the first time looked around the chamber. It was domed in shape and was still hot from the heat of the day. Ulv took off the length of cloth he had wrapped around his body against the chill and refolded it as a kilt, strapping it on under his belt artifacts. He grunted something unintelligible, and when a muttered answer came, Brion for the first time became aware of the woman and the child. The two sat against the far wall, squatting on either side of a heap of fibrous plants. Both were nude, clothed only in the matted hair that fell below their shoulders. The belt of strange tools could not be classified as clothing. Even the child wore a tiny replica of her mother's. Putting down a length of plant she had been chewing, the woman shuffled over to the tiny fire that illuminated the room. A clay pot stood over it, and from this she ladled 3 bowls of food for the men. It smelled atrocious, and Brion tried not to taste or smell the sickening mixture while he ate it. He used his fingers, as did the other men, and did not talk while he ate. There was no way to tell if the silence was ritual or habit. It gave him a chance for a closer look at the Disan way of living. The cave was obviously handmade. Tool marks could be clearly seen in the hard clay of the walls, except in the portion opposite the entrance. This was covered with a network of roots, rising out of the floor and vanishing into the roof of earth above. Perhaps this was the reason for the cave's existence. The thin roots had been carefully twisted and plaited together until they formed a single swollen root in the center, as thick as a man's arm. From this hung 4 of the vaids. Ulv had placed his there before he sat down. The teeth must have instantly sunk in, for it hung unsupported, another link in the Disan life cycle. This appeared to be the source of the vaid's water that nourished the people. Brienne was aware of eyes upon him, and turned and smiled at the little girl. She couldn't have been over 6 years old, but she was already a Disan in every way. She neither returned his smile, nor changed her expression, unchildlike in its stolidity. Her hands and jaw never stopped as she worked on the lengths of fibrous plant her mother had placed before her. The child split them with a small tool, and removed a pod of some kind. This was peeled, partially by scraping with a different tool, and partially by working between her teeth. It took long minutes to remove the tough rind. The results seemed scarcely worth it. A tiny, wriggling object was finally disclosed, which the girl instantly swallowed. She then began working on the next pod. Ulv put down his clay bowl and belched. "I brought you to the city as I told you I would," he said. "Have you done as you said you would?" "What did he promise?" Gek asked. "That he would stop the war. Have you stopped it?" "I am trying to stop it," Brion said. "But it is not that easy. I'll need some help. It is your life that needs saving. Yours and your family's. If you would help me—" "What is the truth?" Ulv broke in savagely. "All I hear is difference, and there is no longer any way to tell truth. For as long as always we have done as the magter say. We bring them food, and they give us the metal, and sometimes water when we need it. As long as we do as they ask, they do not kill us. They live the wrong way, but I have had bronze from them for my tools. They have told us that they are getting a world for us from the Sky People, and that is good. It has always been known that the Sky People are evil in every way, and only good can come from killing them," Gek said. Brion stared back at the 2 Disans and their obvious hatred. "Then why didn't you kill me, Ulv?" he asked. "That first time in the desert, or tonight when you stopped Gek?" "I could have, but there was something more important. What is the truth? Can we believe as we have always done? Or should we listen to this?" He threw a small sheet of plastic to Brion, no bigger than the palm of his hand. A metal button was fastened to one corner of the wafer, and a simple drawing was embedded in the wafer. Brion held it to the light and saw a picture of a man's hand squeezing the button between thumb and forefinger. It was a sub-miniaturized playback. Mechanical pressure on the case provided enough current to play the recorded message. The plastic sheet vibrated, acting as a loudspeaker. Though the voice was thin and scratchy, the words were clearly audible. It was an appeal for the Disan people not to listen to the magter. It explained that the magter had started a war that could have only one ending, the destruction of Dis. Only if the magter were thrown down and their weapons discovered could there be any hope. "Are these words true?" Ulv asked. "Yes," Brion said. "They are perhaps true," Gek said, "but there is nothing that we can do. I was with my brother when these word things fell out of the sky, and he listened to one and took it to the magter to ask him. They killed him, as he should have known they would do. The magter kill us if they know we listen to the words." And the words tell us we will die if we listen to the magter, Ulf shouted, his voice cracking. Not with fear, but with frustration, in the attempt to reconcile two opposite points of view. Up until this time his world had consisted of black and white values, with very few shadings of difference in between. There are things you can do that will stop the war without hurting yourself or the magter, Brienne said, searching for a way to enlist their aid. Tell us, Ulf grunted. There would be no war if the magter could be contacted, made to listen to reason. They are killing you all. You could tell me how to talk to the magter, how I could understand them. No one can talk to the magter, the woman broke in. If you say something different, they will kill you, as they killed Gek's brother, so they are easy to understand. That is the way they are. They do not change. She put the length of plant she had been softening for the child back into her mouth. Her lips were deeply grooved and scarred from a lifetime of this work, her teeth at the sides worn almost to the bone. More is right, Ulf said. You do not talk to magter. What else is there to do? Brion looked at the two men before he spoke, and shifted his weight. The motion brought his fingertips just a few inches from his gun. The magter have bombs that will destroy Nyord. This is the next planet, a star in your sky. If I can find where the bombs are, I will have them taken away, and there will be no war. You want to aid the devils in the sky against our own people, Gek shouted, half rising. Ulf pulled him back to the ground, but there was no more warmth in his voice as he spoke. You are asking too much. You will leave now. Will you help me, though? Will you help stop the war? Brion asked, aware he had gone too far, but unable to stop. Their anger was making them forget the reasons for his being there. You ask too much, Ulf said again. Go back now. We will talk about it. Will I see you again? How can I reach you? We will find you if we wish to talk to you, was all Ulf said. If they decided he was lying, he would never see them again. There was nothing he could do about it. I have made up my mind, Gek said, rising to his feet and drawing his cloth up until it covered his shoulders. You are lying, and this is all a lie of the sky people. If I see you again, I will kill you. He stepped to the tunnel and was gone. There was nothing more to be said. Brienne went out next, checking carefully to be sure that Gek really had left, and Ulf guided him to the spot where the lights of Huvestadt were visible. He did not speak during their return journey, and vanished without a word. Brion shivered in the night chill of the air, and wrapped his coat more tightly around himself. Depressed, he walked back towards the warmer streets of the city. It was dawn when he reached the Foundation building. A new guard was at the front entrance. No amount of hammering or threats could convince the man to open until Fossil came down, yawning and blinking with sleep. He was starting some complaint when Brion cut him off curtly and ordered him to finish dressing and report for work at once. Still feeling elated, Brion hurried into his office and cursed the overly efficient character who had turned on his air conditioner to chill the room again. When he turned it off this time, he removed enough vital parts to keep it out of order for the duration. When Fossil came in, he was still yawning behind his fist, obviously a low morning sugar type. Before you fall on your face, go out and get some coffee, Brion said. 2 cups. I'll have a cup too. That won't be necessary, Fossil said, drawing himself up stiffly. I'll call the canteen if you wish some. He said it in the iciest tone he could manage this early in the morning. In his enthusiasm, Brion had forgotten the hate campaign he had directed against himself. Suit yourself, he said shortly, getting back into the role. But the next time you yawn, there'll be a negative entry in your service record. If that's clear, you can brief me on this organization's visible relations with the Disans. How do they take this? Fossil choked and swallowed a yawn. I believe they look on the CRF people as some species of simpleton, sir. They hate all off-worlders. Memory of their desertion has been passed on verbally for generations. So by their one-to-one logic we should either hate back or go away. We stay instead, and give them food, water, medicine, and artifacts. Because of this, they let us remain on sufferance. I imagine they consider us do-gooders idiots, and as long as we cause no trouble they'll let us stay. He was struggling miserably to suppress a yawn, so Brion turned his back and gave him a chance to get it out. What about the Nyorders? How much do they know of our work? Brion looked out the window at dusty buildings outlined in purple against the violent colors of the desert sunrise. Nyord is a cooperating planet and has full knowledge at all executive levels. They're giving us all the aid they can. Well, now is the time to ask for more. Can I contact the commander of the blockading fleet? There is a scrambler connection right through to him. I'll set it up. Fossil bent over the desk and punched a number into the phone controls. The screen flowed with the black and white patterns of the scrambler. That's all, Fossil, Brion said. I want privacy for this talk. What's the commander's name? Professor Croft. He's a physicist. They have no military men at all, so they called him in for the construction of the bombs and energy weapons. He's still in charge. Fossil yawned extravagantly as he went out the door. The professor commander was very old, with wispy gray hair and a network of wrinkles surrounding his eyes. His image shimmered, then cleared as the scrambler units aligned. You must be Brion Brandd, he said. I have to tell you how sorry we all are that your friend Isle and the two others had to die after coming so far to help us. I'm sure you are very happy to have had a friend like that. Why, yes, of course, Brion said, reaching for the scattered fragments of his thought processes. It took an effort to remember the first conflict now that he was worrying about the death of a planet. It's very kind of you to mention it, but I would like to find out a few things from you if I could. Anything at all. We are at your disposal. Before we begin, though, I shall pass on the thanks of our council for your aid in joining us. Even if we are eventually forced to drop the bombs, we shall never forget that your organization did everything possible to avert the disaster. Once again Brion was caught off balance. For an instant he wondered if Croft was being insincere, then recognized the baseness of this thought. The completeness of the man's humanity was obvious and compelling. The thought passed through Brion's mind that now he had an additional reason for wanting the war ended without destruction on either side. He very much wanted to visit Nyord and see these people on their home grounds. Professor Croft waited patiently and silently while Brion pulled his thoughts together and answered, I still hope this thing can be stopped in time. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to see Lig Magda, and I thought it would be better if I had a legitimate reason. Are you in contact with him? Croft shook his head. No, not really in contact. When this trouble started, I sent him a transceiver so we could talk directly. But he has delivered his ultimatum, speaking for the magter. The only terms he will hear are unconditional surrender. His receiver is on, but he has said that is the only message he will answer. Not much chance of him ever being told that, Brion said. There was, at one time. I hope you realize, Brion, that the decision to bomb Dis was not easily arrived at. A great many people, myself included, voted for unconditional surrender. We lost the vote by a very slim margin. Brion was getting used to these philosophical body blows, and he rolled with the punches now. Are there any of your people left on this planet, or do you have any troops I can call on for help? This is still a remote possibility, but if I do find out where the bombs or the launchers are, a surprise raid would knock them out. We have no people left in Halberstadt now. All the ones who weren't evacuated were killed. But there are commando teams standing by here to make a landing if the weapons are detected. The Disans must depend on secrecy to protect their armament, since we have both the manpower and the technology to reach any objective. We also have technicians and other volunteers looking for the weapon sites. They have not been successful as yet, and most of them were killed soon after landing. Croft hesitated for a moment. There is another group you should know about. You will need all the factors. Some of our people are in the desert outside of Hovedstadt. We do not officially approve of them, though they have a good deal of popular support. They are mostly young men, operating as raiders, killing and destroying with very little compunction. They are attempting to uncover the weapons by sheer strength of arms. This was the best news yet. Brienne controlled his voice and kept his expression calm when he spoke. I don't know how far I can stretch your cooperation, but could you possibly tell me how to get in touch with them? Croft allowed himself a small smile. I'll give you the wavelength on which you can reach their radio. They call themselves the Nyord Army. When you talk to them, you can do me a favor. Pass on a message. Just to prove things aren't bad enough, they've become a little worse. One of our technical crews has detected jump space energy transmissions in the planetary crust. The Disans are apparently testing their projector sooner than we had estimated. Our deadline has been revised by 1 day. I'm afraid there are only 2 days left before you must evacuate. His eyes were large with compassion. I'm sorry. I know this will make your job that much harder. Brion didn't want to think about the loss of a full day from his already close deadline. Have you told the Disans this yet? No, Croft told him. The decision was reached a few minutes before your call. It is going on the radio to Lig Magda now. Can you cancel the transmission and let me take the message in person? I can do that, Croft said for a moment. But it would surely mean your death at their hands. They have no hesitation in killing any of our people. I would prefer to send it by radio. If you do that, you will be interfering with my plans and perhaps destroying them under the guise of saving my life. Isn't my life my own, to dispose of as I will? For the first time, Professor Croft was upset. I'm sorry. Terribly sorry. I'm letting my concern and worry wash over into my public affairs. Of course you may do as you please. I could never think of stopping you. He turned and said something inaudible off-screen. The call is canceled. The responsibility is yours. All our wishes for success go with you. End of transmission. End of transmission, Brienne said, and the screen went dark. Fossil, he shouted into the intercom, get me the best and fastest sandcar we have, a driver who knows his way around, and 2 men who can handle a gun and know how to take orders. We're going to get some positive action at last. End of chapter 9. Of Planet of the Damned. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by November 8 Echo Victor Victor. Planet of the Damned by Harry Harrison. Chapter 10. It's suicide, the taller guard grumbled. Mine, not yours, so don't worry about it, Brion barked at him. Your job is to remember your orders and keep them straight. Now let's hear them again. The guard rolled his eyes up in silent rebellion and repeated in a toneless voice, We stay here in the car and keep the motor running while you go inside the stone pile there. We don't let anybody in the car, and we try to keep them clear of the car, short of shooting them, that is. We don't come in no matter what happens or what it looks like, but wait for you here. Unless you call on the radio, in which case we come in with the automatics going and shoot the place up, and it doesn't matter who we hit. This will be done only as a last resort. See if you can't arrange that last resort thing, the other guard said, patting the heavy blue barrel of his weapon. I meant that last resort, Brion said angrily. If any guns go off without my permission, you will pay for it, and pay with your necks. I want that clearly understood. You are here as a rear guard and a base for me to get back to. This is my operation and mine alone unless I call you in. Understood? He waited until all three men had nodded in agreement, then checked the charge on his gun. It was fully loaded. It would be foolish to go in unarmed, but he had to. One gun wouldn't save him. He put it aside. The button radio on his collar was working and had a strong enough signal to get through any number of walls. He took off his coat, threw open the door, and stepped out into the searing brilliance of the Disan noon. There was only the desert silence, broken by the steady throb of the car's motor behind him. Stretching away to the horizon in every direction was the eternal desert of sand. The keep stood nearby, solitary, a massive pile of black rock. Brion plodded closer, watching for any motion from the walls. Nothing stirred. The high-walled, irregularly shaped construction sat in a ponderous silence. Brion was sweating now, only partially from the heat. He circled the thing looking for a gate. There wasn't one at ground level. A slanting cleft in the stone could be climbed easily, but it seemed incredible that this might be the only entrance. A complete circuit proved that it was. Brion looked unhappily at the slanting and broken ramp, then cupped his hands and shouted loudly, "I'm coming up! Your radio doesn't work anymore. I'm bringing the message from Nyord that you have been waiting to hear." This was a slight bending of the truth, without fracturing it. There was no answer, just the hiss of wind-blown sand against the rock and the mutter of the car in the background. He started to climb. The rock underfoot was crumbling, and he had to watch where he put his feet. At the same time, he fought a constant impulse to look up, watching for anything falling from above. Nothing happened. When he reached the top of the wall, he was breathing hard. Sweat moistened his body. There was still no one in sight. He stood on an unevenly shaped wall that appeared to circle the building. Instead of having a courtyard inside it, the wall was the outer face of the structure, the domed roof rising from it. At varying intervals, dark openings gave access to the interior. When Brion looked down, the sand car was just a dun-colored bump in the desert, already far behind him. Stooping, he went through the nearest door. There was still no one in sight. The room inside was something out of a madman's funhouse. It was higher than it was wide, irregular in shape, and more like a hallway than a room. At one end it merged into an incline that became a stairwell. At the other, it ended in a hole that vanished in darkness below. Light of sorts filtered in through slots and holes drilled into the thick stone wall. Everything was built of the same crumble-textured but strong rock. Brion took the stairs. After a number of blind passages and wrong turns, he saw a stronger light ahead and went on. There was food, metal, even artifacts of the unusual Disan design in the different rooms he passed through. Yet no people. The light ahead grew stronger, and the last passageway opened and swelled out until it led into the large central chamber. This was the heart of the strange structure. All the rooms, passageways, and halls existed just to give form to this gigantic chamber. The walls rose sharply, the room being circular in cross-section, and growing narrower towards the top. It was a truncated cone, since there was no ceiling. A hot blue disk of sky cast light on the floor below. On the floor stood a knot of men who stared at Brion. Out of the corner of his eyes, and with the very periphery of his consciousness, he was aware of the rest of the room. Barrels, stores, machinery, a radio transceiver, various bundles and heaps that made no sense at first glance. There was no time to look closer. Every fraction of his attention was focused on the muffled and hooded men. He had found the enemy. Everything that had happened to him so far on Dis had been preparation for this moment. The attack in the desert, the escape, the dreadful heat of sun and sand, all this had tempered and prepared him. It had been nothing in itself. Now the battle would begin in earnest. None of this was conscious in his mind. His fighter's reflexes bent his shoulders, curved his hands before him as he walked softly in balance, ready to spring in any direction. Yet none of this was really necessary. All the danger so far was non-physical. When he did give conscious thought to the situation, he stopped, startled. What was wrong here? None of the men had moved or made a sound. How could he even know they were men? They were so muffled and wrapped in cloth that only their eyes were exposed. No doubt, however, existed in Brion's mind. In spite of muffled cloth and silence, he knew them for what they were. The eyes were empty of expression and unmoving, yet were filled with the same negative emptiness as those of a bird of prey. They could look on life, death, and the rending of flesh with the same lack of interest and compassion. All this Brion knew in an instant of time, without words being spoken. Between the time he lifted one foot and walked a step, he understood what he had to face. There could be no doubt, not to an empathetic. From the group of silent men poured a frost-white wave of unemotion. An empathetic shares what other men feel. He gets his knowledge of their reaction by sensing lightly their emotions, the surges of interest, hate, love, fear, desire, the sweep of large and small sensations that accompany all thought and action. The empathetic is always aware of this constant and silent surge, whether he makes the effort to understand it or not. He is like a man glancing across the open pages of a table full of books. He can see that the type, words, paragraphs, thoughts are there, even without focusing his attention to understand any of it. Then how does the man feel when he glances at the open books and sees only blank pages? The books are there, the words are not. He turns the pages of one, of the others, flipping the pages, searching for meaning. There is no meaning. All the pages are blank. This was the way in which the magter were blank, without emotions. There was a barely sensed surge and return that must have been neural impulses on a basic level, the automatic adjustments of sense and muscle that keep an organism alive. Nothing more. Brion reached for other sensations, but there was nothing there to grasp. Either these men were without emotions, or they were able to block them from his detection. It was impossible to tell which. Very little time had passed while Brion made these discoveries. The knot of men still looked at him, silent and unmoving. They weren't expectant. Their attitude could not have been called one of interest. But he had come to them and now they waited to find out why. Any questions or statements they spoke would be superfluous, so they didn't speak. The responsibility was his. I have come to talk with Lig Magda. Who is he? Brion didn't like the tiny sound his voice made in the immense room. One of the men gave a slight motion to draw attention to himself. None of the others moved. They still waited. I have a message for you, Brion said, speaking slowly to fill the silence of the room and the emptiness of his thoughts. This had to be handled right. But what was right? I'm from the Foundation in the city, as you undoubtedly know. I've been talking to the people of Nyjord. They have a message for you. The silence grew longer. Brion had no intention of making this a monologue. He needed facts to operate, to form an opinion. Looking at the silent forms was telling him nothing. Time stretched taut, and finally Lig Magda spoke. The Nyorders are going to surrender. It was an impossibly strange sentence. Brienne had never realized before how much of the content of speech was made up of emotion. If a man had given it a positive emphasis, perhaps said it with enthusiasm, it would have meant, "Success! The enemy is going to surrender." This wasn't the meaning. With a rising inflection on the end, it would have been a question. Are they going to surrender? It was neither of these. The sentence carried no other message than that it contained in the simplest meanings of the separate words. It had intellectual connotations, but these could only be gained from past knowledge, not from the sound of the words. There was only one message they were prepared to receive from Nyord. Therefore Brienne was bringing the message. If that was not the message Brienne was bringing, the men here were not interested. This was the vital fact. If they were not interested, he could have no further value to them. Since he came from the enemy, he was the enemy. Therefore he would be killed. Because this was vital to his existence, Brienne took the time to follow the thought through. It made logical sense, and logic was all he could depend on now. He could be talking to robots or alien creatures for all the human response he was receiving. You can't win this war. All you can do is hurry your own deaths. He said this with as much conviction as he could, realizing at the same time that it was wasted effort. No flicker of response stirred in the men before him. The Nyorders know you have the cobalt bombs, and they have detected your jump space projector. They can't take any more chances. They have pushed the deadline closer by an entire day. There are 1.5 days left before the bombs fall, and you are all destroyed. Do you realize what that means? Is that the message? Lig Magda asked. Yes, Brienne said. 2 things saved his life then. He had guessed what would happen as soon as they had his message, though he hadn't been sure. But even the suspicion had put him on his guard. This, combined with the reflexes of a winner of the Twenties, was barely enough to enable him to survive. From frozen mobility, Lig Magda had catapulted into headlong attack. As he leaped forward, he drew a curved, double-edged blade from under his robes. It plunged unerringly through the spot where Brienne's body had been an instant before. There had been no time to tense his muscles and jump, just the space of time to relax them and fall to one side. His reasoning mind joined the battle as he hit the floor. Lig Magda plunged by him, turning and bringing the knife down at the same time. Brienne's foot lashed out and caught the other man's leg, sending him sprawling. They were both on their feet at the same instant, facing each other. Brienne now had his hands clasped before him in the unarmed man's best defense against a knife, the 2 arms protecting the body, the 2 hands joined to beat aside the knife arm from whichever direction it came. The Disan hunched low, flipped the knife quickly from hand to hand, then thrust it again at Brienne's midriff. Only by the merest fractional margin did Brienne evade the attack for the second time. Lig Magda fought with utter violence. Every action was as intense as possible, deadly and thorough. There could be only one end to this unequal contest if Brienne stayed on the defensive. The man with the knife had to win. With the next charge, Brienne changed tactics. He leaped inside the thrust, clutching for the knife arm. A burning slice of pain cut across his arm. Then his fingers clutched the tendoned wrist. They clamped down hard, grinding shut, compressing with the tightening intensity of a closing vise. It was all he could do, simply to hold on. There was no science in it, just his greater strength from exercise and existence on a heavier planet. All of this strength went to his clutching hand, because he held his own life in that hand, forcing away the knife that wanted to terminate it forever. Nothing else mattered. Neither the frightening force of the knees that thudded into his body, nor the hooked fingers that reached for his eyes to tear them out. He protected his face as well as he could, while the nails tore furrows through his flesh, and the cut on his arm bled freely. These were only minor things to be endured. His life depended on the grasp of the fingers of his right hand. There was a sudden immobility as Brion succeeded in clutching Lig Magda's other arm. It was a good grip, and he could hold the arm immobilized. They had reached stasis, standing knee to knee, their faces only a few inches apart. The muffling cloth had fallen from the Disan's face during the struggle, and empty, frigid eyes stared into Brion's. No flicker of emotion crossed the harsh planes of the other man's face. A great puckered white scar covered one cheek, and pulled up a corner of the mouth in a cheerless grimace. It was false. There was still no expression here, even when the pain must be growing more intense. Brion was winning, if none of the watchers broke the impasse. His greater weight and strength counted now. The Disan would have to drop the knife before his arm was dislocated at the shoulder. He didn't do it. With sudden horror, Brion realized that he wasn't going to drop it, no matter what happened. A dull, hideous snap jerked through the Disan's body, and the arm hung limp and dead. No expression crossed the man's face. The knife was still locked in the fingers of the paralyzed hand. With his other hand, Lig Magda reached across and started to pry the blade loose, ready to continue the battle one-handed. Brion raised his foot and kicked the knife free, sending it spinning across the room. Lig Magda made a fist of his good hand and crashed it into Brion's groin. He was still fighting, as if nothing had changed. Brion backed slowly away from the man. "Stop it," he said. "You can't win now. It's impossible." He called to the other men who were watching the unequal battle with expressionless immobility. No one answered him. With a terrible sinking sensation, Brion then realized what would happen and what he had to do. Lig Magda was as heedless of his own life as he was of the life of his planet. He would press the attack no matter what damage was done to him. Brion had an insane vision of him breaking the man's other arm, fracturing both his legs, and the limbless, broken creature still coming forward, crawling, rolling, teeth bared, since they were the only remaining weapon. There was only one way to end it. Brion fainted, and the Lig Magda's arm moved clear of his body. The engulfing cloth was thin, and through it Brion could see the outlines of the Disan's abdomen and rib cage, the clear location of the great nerve ganglion. It was the death blow of karate. Brion had never used it on a man. In practice, he had broken heavy boards, splintering them instantly with the short, precise stroke. The stiffened hand moving forward in a sudden surge, all the weight and energy of his body concentrated in his joined fingertips, plunging deep into the other's flesh. Killing not by accident or in sudden anger. Killing because this was the only way the battle could possibly end. Like a ruined tower of flesh, the Disan crumpled and fell. Dripping blood, exhausted, Brion stood over the body of Lig Magda and stared at the dead man's allies. Death filled the room. End of chapter 10. Planet of the Damned. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by November 8 Echo Victor Victor. Planet of the Damned by Harry Harrison. Chapter 11. Facing the silent Disans, Brion's thoughts hurtled about in sweeping circles. There would be no more than an instant's tick of time before the magter avenged themselves bloodily and completely. He felt a fleeting regret for not having brought his gun, then abandoned the thought. There was no time for regrets. What could he do now? The silent watchers hadn't attacked instantly, and Brienne realized that they couldn't be positive yet that Lig Magda had been killed. Only Brienne himself knew the deadliness of that blow. Their lack of knowledge might buy him a little more time. Lig Magda is unconscious, but he will revive quickly, Brienne said, pointing to the huddled body. As the eyes turned automatically to follow his finger, he began walking slowly towards the exit. I did not want to do this, but he forced me to, because he wouldn't listen to reason. Now I have something else to show you, something that I hoped it would not be necessary to reveal. He was saying the first words that came into his head, trying to keep them distracted as long as possible. He must appear to be only going across the room. That was the feeling he must generate. There was even time to stop for a second and straighten his rumpled clothing and brush the sweat from his eyes. Talking easily, walking slowly towards the hall that led out of the chamber. He was halfway there when the spell broke and the rush began. One of the magter knelt and touched the body and shouted a single word. "Dead!" Brienne hadn't waited for the official announcement. At the first movement of feet, he dived headlong for the shelter of the exit. There was a spatter of tiny missiles on the wall next to him, and he had a brief glimpse of raised blowguns before the wall intervened. He went up the dimly lit stairs 3 at a time. The pack was just behind him, voiceless and deadly. He could not gain on them. If anything, they were closing the distance as he pushed his already tired body to the utmost. There was no subtlety or trick he could use now, just straightforward flight back the way he had come. A single slip on the irregular steps, and it would be all over. There was someone ahead of him. If the woman had waited a few seconds more, he would certainly have been killed, but instead of slashing at him as he went by the doorway, she made the mistake of rushing to the center of the stairs, the knife ready to impale him as he came up. Without slowing, Brienne fell onto his hands and easily dodged under the blow. As he passed, he twisted and seized her around the waist, picking her from the ground. When her legs lifted from under her, the woman screamed, the first human sound Brienne had heard in this human anthill. His pursuers were just behind him, and he hurled the woman into them with all his strength. They fell in a tangle, and Brienne used the precious seconds gained to reach the top of the building. There must have been other stairs and exits, because one of the magter stood between Brienne and the way down out of this trap, armed and ready to kill him if he tried to pass. As he ran towards the executioner, Brienne flicked on his collar radio and shouted into it, "I'm in trouble here, can you—" The guards in the car must have been waiting for this message. Before he had finished, there was the thud of a high-velocity slug hitting flesh, and the Disan spun and fell, blood soaking his shoulder. Brienne leaped over him and headed for the ramp. "This next one is me. Hold your fire," he called. Both guards must have had their telescopic sights zeroed on the spot. They let Brienne pass, then threw in a hail of semi-automatic fire that tore chunks from the stone and screamed away in noisy ricochets. Brienne didn't try to see if anyone was braving this hail of covering fire. He concentrated his energies on making as quick and erratic a descent as he could. Above the sounds of the firing, he heard the car motor howl as it leaped forward. With their careful aim spoiled, the gunners switched to full automatic and unleashed a hailstorm of flying metal that bracketed the top of the tower. "Cease firing!" Brienne gasped into the radio as he ran. The driver was good and timed his arrival with exactitude. The car reached the base of the tower at the same instant Brienne did, and he burst through the door while it was still moving. No orders were necessary. He fell headlong onto a seat as the car swung in a dust-raising turn and ground into high gear back to the city. Reaching over carefully, the tall guard gently extracted a bit of pointed wood and fluff from a fold of Brienne's pants. He cracked open the car door and just as delicately threw it out. "I knew that thing didn't touch you," he said, "since you're still among the living. They've got a poison on those blowgun darts that takes all of 12 seconds to work. Lucky." Lucky? Brion was beginning to realize just how lucky he was to be out of the trap alive. And with information. Now that he knew more about the magter, he shuddered at his innocence in walking alone and unarmed into the tower. Skill had helped him survive, but better than average luck had been necessary. Curiosity had gotten him in, brashness and speed had taken him out. He was exhausted, battered and bloody, but cheerfully happy. The facts about the magter were arranging themselves into a theory that might explain their attempt at racial suicide. It just needed a little time to be put into shape. A pain cut across his arm and he jumped, startled, pieces of his thoughts crashing into ruin around him. The gunner had cracked the first aid box and was swabbing his arm with antiseptic. The knife wound was long, but not deep. Brion shivered while the bandage was going on, then quickly slipped into his coat. The air conditioner whined industriously, bringing down the temperature. There was no attempt to follow the car. When the black tower had dropped over the horizon, the guards relaxed, ran cleaning rods through their guns, and compared marksmanship. All of their antagonism towards Brion was gone. They actually smiled at him. He had given them the first chance to shoot back since they had been on this planet. The ride was uneventful, and Brion was scarcely aware of it. A theory was taking form in his mind. It was radical and startling, yet it seemed to be the only one that fitted the facts. He pushed at it from all sides, but if there were any holes he couldn't find them. What it needed was dispassionate proving or disproving. There was only one person on Dis who was qualified to do this. Leah was working in the lab when he came in, bent over a low-power binocular microscope. Something small, limbless, and throbbing was on the slide. She glanced up when she heard his footsteps, smiling warmly when she recognized him. Fatigue and pain had drawn her face. Her skin, glistening with burn ointment, was chapped and peeling. "I must look a wreck," she said, putting the back of her hand to her cheek. "Something like a well-oiled and lightly cooked piece of beef." She lowered her arms suddenly and took his hand in both of hers. Her palms were warm and slightly moist. "Thank you, Brion," was all she could say. Her society on Earth was highly civilized and sophisticated, able to discuss any topic without emotion and without embarrassment. This was fine in most circumstances, but it made it difficult to thank a person for saving your life. However you tried to phrase it, it came out sounding like a last act speech from a historical play. There was no doubt, however, as to what she meant. Her eyes were large and dark, the pupils dilated by the drugs she had been given. They could not lie, nor could the emotions he sensed. He did not answer, just held her hand an instant longer. "How do you feel?" he asked, concerned. His conscience twinged as he remembered that he was the one who had ordered her out of bed and back to work today. "I should be feeling terrible," she said with an airy wave of her hand. "But I'm walking on top of the world. I'm so loaded with painkillers and stimulants that I'm high as the moon. All the nerves to my feet feel turned off. It's like walking on 2 balls of fluff. Thanks for getting me out of that awful hospital and back to work." Brion was suddenly sorry for having driven her from her sick bed. "Don't be sorry," Leah said, apparently reading his mind, but really seeing only his sudden ashamed expression. "I'm feeling no pain. Honestly, I feel a little lightheaded and foggy at times, nothing more. And this is the job I came here to do. In fact, well, it's almost impossible to tell you just how fascinating it all is. It's almost worth getting baked and parboiled for." She swung back to the microscope, centering the specimen with a turn of the stage adjustment screw. Poor Isle was right when he said this planet was exobiologically fascinating. This is a gastropod, a lot like Odostomia, but it has parasitical morphological changes so profound that... There's something else I remember, Brion said, interrupting her enthusiastic lecture, only half of which he could understand. Didn't Isle also hope that you would give some study to the natives as well as their environment? The problem is with the Disans, not with the local wildlife. But I am studying them, Leah insisted. The Disans have attained an incredibly advanced form of commensalism. Their lives are so intimately connected and integrated with the other life forms that they must be studied in relation to their environment. I doubt if they show as many external physical changes as little eating foot Odostomia on the slide here, but there will surely be a number of psychological changes and adjustments that will crop up. One of these might be the explanation of their urge for planetary suicide. That may be true, but I don't think so, Brion said. I went on a little expedition this morning and found something that has more immediate relevancy. For the first time, Leah became aware of his slightly battered condition. Her drug-grooved mind could only follow a single idea at a time and had overlooked the significance of the bandage and dirt. I've been visiting, Brion said, forestalling the question on her lips. The Magter are the ones who are responsible for causing the trouble, and I had to see them up close before I could make any decisions. It wasn't a very pleasant thing, but I found out what I wanted to know. They are different in every way from the normal Disans. I've compared them. I've talked to Olv, the native who saved us in the desert, and I can understand him. He is not like us in many ways. He certainly couldn't be living in this oven, but he is still undeniably human. He gave us drinking water when we needed it, then brought help. The Magter, the upper-class lords of Dis, are the direct opposite. As cold-blooded and ruthless a bunch of murderers as you can possibly imagine. They tried to kill me when they met me without reason. Their clothes, habits, dwellings, manners, everything about them differs from that of the normal Disan. More important, the Magdar are as coldly efficient and inhuman as a reptile. They have no emotions, no love, no hate, no anger, no fear, nothing. Each of them is a chilling bundle of thought processes and reactions with all the emotions removed. Aren't you exaggerating? Leah asked. After all, you can't be sure. It might just be part of their training not to reveal any emotional state. Everyone must experience emotional states whether they like it or not. That's my main point. Everyone does, except the Magter. I can't go into all the details now, so you'll just have to take my word for it. Even at the point of death, they have no fear or hatred. It may sound impossible, but it is true. Leah tried to shake the knots from her drug-hazed mind. I'm dull today, she said. You'll have to excuse me. If these rulers had no emotional responses, that might explain their present suicidal position. But an explanation like this raises more new problems than it supplies answers to the old ones. How did they get this way? It doesn't seem humanly possible to be without emotions of some kind. Just my point. Not humanly possible. I think these ruling class Disans aren't human at all, like the other Disans. I think they are alien creatures, robots, or androids. Anything except men. I think they are living in disguise among the normal human dwellers. At first Leah started to smile. Then her feeling changed when she saw his face. You are serious? She asked. Never more so. I realize it must sound as if I've had my brains bounced around too much this morning. Yet, this is the only idea I can come up with that fits all of the facts. Look at the evidence yourself. One simple thing stands out clearly, and it must be considered first if any theory is to hold up. That is the magter's complete indifference to death, their own or anyone else's. Is that normal to mankind?
No, but I can find a couple of explanations that I would rather explore first before dragging in an alien life form. There must have been a mutation or an inherited disease that has deformed or warped their minds.
Wouldn't that be sort of self-eliminating? Brienne asked. Anti-survival? People who die before puberty would find it a little difficult to pass on a mutation to their children. But let's not beat this one point to death. It's the totality of those people that I find so hard to accept. Any one thing might be explained away, but not the collection of them. What about their complete lack of emotion, or their manner of dress and their secrecy in general? The ordinary Disan wears a cloth kilt, while the magter cover themselves as completely as possible. They stay in their black towers and never go out except in groups. Their dead are always removed so they can't be examined. In every way they act like a race apart, and I think they are.
Granted for the moment that this outlandish idea might be true, how did they get here? And why doesn't anyone know about it besides them?
Easily enough explained, Brion insisted. There are no written records on this planet. After the breakdown, when the handful of survivors were just trying to exist here, the aliens could have landed and moved in. Any interference could have been wiped out. Once the population began to grow, the invaders found they could keep control by staying separate, so their alien difference wouldn't be noticed.
Why should that bother them? Leah asked. If they are so indifferent to death, they can't have any strong thoughts on public opinion or alien body odor. Why would they bother with such a complex camouflage? If they arrived from another planet, what has happened to the scientific ability that brought them here?
Peace, Brion said. I don't know enough to be able even to guess at answers to half your questions. I'm just trying to fit a theory to the facts, and the facts are clear. The magter are so inhuman, they would give me nightmares if I were sleeping these days. What we need is more evidence.
Then get it, Leah said with finality. I'm not telling you to turn murderer, but you might try a bit of grave digging. Give me a scalpel and one of your friends stretched out on a slab, and I'll quickly tell you what he is or not.
She turned back to the microscope and bent over the eyepiece. That was really the only way to hack the Gordian knot. Dis had only 36 more hours to live, so individual deaths shouldn't be of any concern. He had to find a dead magter, and if none was obtainable in the proper condition, he had to get one of them by violence. For a planetary savior, he was personally doing in an awful lot of the citizenry. He stood behind Leah, looking down at her thought fully while she worked. The back of her neck, lightly covered with gently curling hair, was turned toward him. With one of the about-face shifts the mind is capable of, his thoughts flipped from death to life, and he experienced a strong desire to caress this spot lightly, to feel the yielding texture of female flesh. Plunging his hands deep into his pockets, he walked quickly to the door. "Get some rest soon," he called to her. "I doubt if those bugs will give you the answer. I'm going now to see if I can get the full-sized specimen you want."
"The truth could be anywhere. I'll stay on these until you come back," she said, not looking up from the microscope.
Up under the roof was a well-equipped communications room. Brion had taken a quick look at it when he had first toured the building. The duty operator had earphones on, though only one of the phones covered an ear, and was monitoring through the bands. His shoeless feet were on the edge of the table, and he was eating a thick sandwich held in his free hand. His eyes bulged when he saw Brion in the doorway, and he jumped into a flurry of action. "Hold the pose," Brion told him. "It doesn't bother me, and if you make any sudden moves, you are liable to break a phone, electrocute yourself, or choke to death.
Just see if you can set the transceiver on this frequency for me." Brienne wrote the number on a scratch pad and slid it over to the operator. It was the frequency Professor Commander Croft had given him for the radio of the illegal terrorists, the Nyord Army. The operator plugged in a handset and gave it to Brienne. "Circuit open," he mumbled around a mouthful of still unswallowed sandwich. "This is Brandt, director of the CRF. Come in, please." He went on repeating this for more than 10 minutes before he got an answer. "What do you want?" "I have a message of vital urgency for you, and I would also like your help. Do you want any more information on the radio?" "No. Wait there. We'll get in touch with you after dark." The carrier wave went dead. 35 hours to the end of the world, and all he could do was wait. End of chapter 11. Planet of the Damned. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by November 8 Echo Victor Victor. Planet of the Damned by Harry Harrison. Chapter 12. On Brion's desk when he came in were 2 neat piles of paper. As he sat down and reached for them, he was conscious of an arctic coldness in the air, a frigid blast. It was coming from the air conditioner grill, which was now covered by welded steel bars. The control unit was sealed shut. Someone was either being very funny or very efficient. Either way, it was cold. Brion kicked at the cover plate until it buckled, then bent it aside. After a careful look into the interior, he disconnected one wire and shorted it to another. He was rewarded by a number of sputtering cracks and a quantity of smoke. The compressor moaned and expired. Fossil was standing in the door with more papers, a shocked expression on his face. "What do you have there?" Brion asked. Fossil managed to straighten out his face and brought the papers to the desk, arranging them on the piles already there. "These are the progress reports you asked for from all units, details to date, conclusions, suggestions, etc." "And the other pile?" Brion pointed. "Off-planet correspondence, commissary invoices, requisitions." He straightened the edges of the stack while he answered. "Daily reports, hospital log." His voice died away and stopped as Brion carefully pushed the stack off the edge of the desk into the wastebasket. "In other words, red tape," Brion said. "Well, it's all filed." One by one the progress reports followed the first stack into the basket until the desk was clear. Nothing. It was just what he had expected, but there had always been the off chance that one of the specialists could come up with a new approach. They hadn't. They were all too busy specializing. Outside, the sky was darkening. The front entrance guard had been told to let in anyone who came asking for the director. There was nothing else Brion could do until the Nyord rebels made contact. Irritation bit at him. At least Leah was doing something constructive. He could look in on her. He opened the door to the lab with a feeling of pleasant anticipation. It froze and shattered instantly. Her microscope was hooded and she was gone. She's having dinner, he thought, or she's in the hospital. The hospital was on the floor below and he went there first. "Of course she's here," Dr. Stein grumbled. "Where else should a girl in her condition be? She was out of bed long enough today. Tomorrow's the last day, and if you want to get any more work out of her before the deadline, you had better let her rest tonight. Better let the whole staff rest. I've been handing out tranquilizers like aspirin all day. They're falling apart." "The world's falling apart. How is Leah doing?" "Considering her shape, she's fine. Go in and see for yourself if you won't take my word for it. I have other patients to look at." "Are you that worried, Doctor?" "Of course I am. I'm just as prone to the weakness of the flesh as the rest of you. We're sitting on a ticking bomb, and I don't like it. I'll do my job as long as necessary. But I'll also be damned glad to see the ships land to pull us out. The only skin that I really feel emotionally concerned about right now is my own. And if you want to be let in on a public secret, the rest of your staff feels the same way. So don't look forward to too much efficiency."
"I never did," Brion said to the retreating back. Leah's room was dark, illuminated only by the light of Dis's moon slanting in through the window. Brion let himself in and closed the door behind him. Walking quietly, he went over to the bed. Leah was sleeping soundly, her breathing gentle and regular. A night's sleep now would do as much good as all the medication. He should have gone then. Instead, he sat down in the chair placed next to the head of the bed. The guards knew where he was. He could wait here just as well as any place else. It was a stolen moment of peace on a world at the brink of destruction. He was grateful for it. Everything looked less harsh in the moonlight, and he rubbed some of the tension from his eyes. Leah's face was ironed smooth by the light, beautiful and young, a direct contrast to everything else on this poisonous world. Her hand was outside of the covers, and he took it in his own, obeying a sudden impulse. Looking out of the window at the desert in the distance, he let the peace wash over him, forcing himself to forget for the moment that in one more day life would be stripped from this planet. Later, when he looked back at Leah, he saw that her eyes were open, though she hadn't moved. How long had she been awake? He jerked his hand away from hers, feeling suddenly guilty. "Is the boss man looking after the serfs to see if they're fit for the treadmills in the morning?" she asked. It was the kind of remark she had used with such frequency in the ship, though it didn't sound quite as harsh now. And she was smiling, yet it reminded him too well of her superior attitude toward rubes from the Stellar Sticks. Here he might be the director, but on ancient Earth he would be only one more gaping, lead-footed yokel. "How do you feel?" he asked, realizing and hating the triteness of the words, even as he said them.
"Terrible. I'll be dead by morning. Reach me a piece of fruit from that bowl, will you? My mouth tastes like an old boot heel. I wonder how fresh fruit ever got here. Probably a gift to the working classes from the smiling planetary murderers on Nyord." She took the apple Brion gave her and bit into it. "Did you ever think of going to Earth?" Brion was startled. This was too close to his own thoughts about planetary backgrounds. There couldn't possibly be a connection, though. "Never," he told her. "Up until a few months ago I never even considered leaving Anvhar. The Twenties are such a big thing at home that it is hard to imagine that anything else exists while you are still taking part in them." "Spare me the Twenties," she pleaded. "After listening to you and Isle, I know far more about them than I shall ever care to know. But what about Anvhar itself? Do you have big city-states as Earth does?"
"Nothing like that. For its size it has a very small population. No big cities at all. I guess the largest center of population are around the schools, packing plants, things like that."
"Any exobiologists there?" Leah asked, with a woman's eternal ability to make any general topic personal.
"At the universities, I suppose, though I wouldn't know for sure. And you must realize that when I say no big cities, I also mean no little cities. We aren't organized that way at all. I imagine the basic physical unit is the family and the circle of friends. Friends get important quickly, since the family breaks up when children are still relatively young. Something in the genes, I suppose. We all enjoy being alone. I suppose you might call it an inbred survival trait."
"Up to a point," she said, biting delicately into the apple. "Carry that sort of thing too far and you end up with no population at all. A certain amount of proximity is necessary for that."
"Of course it is, and there must be some form of recognized relationship or control. That or complete promiscuity.
On Anvhar, the emphasis is on personal responsibility, and that seems to take care of the problem. If we didn't have an adult way of looking at things, our kind of life would be impossible. Individuals are brought together either by accident or design, and with this proximity must be some certainty of relations.
You're losing me, Leah protested. Either I'm still foggy from the dope, or you are suddenly unable to speak a word of less than 4 syllables. You know, whenever this happens with you, I get the distinct impression that you are trying to cover up something. For Occam's sake, be specific. Bring me together 2 of these hypothetical individuals and tell me what happens.
Brion took a deep breath. He was in over his head and far from shore. Well, take a bachelor like myself. Since I like cross-country skiing, I make my home in this big house our family has, right at the edge of the Broken Hills. In summer I looked after a drum-tum herd, but after slaughtering, my time was my own all winter. I did a lot of skiing, and used to work for the Twenties. Sometimes I would go visiting. Then again, people would drop in on me. Houses are few and far between on Anvhar. We don't even have locks on our doors. You accept and give hospitality without qualification. Whoever comes, male, female, in groups, or just traveling alone.
I get the drift. Life must be dull for a single girl on your iceberg planet. She must surely have to stay home a lot.
Only if she wants to. Otherwise she can go wherever she wishes and be welcomed as another individual. I suppose it is out of fashion in the rest of the galaxy, and would probably raise a big laugh on Earth, but a platonic, disinterested friendship between a man and woman is an accepted thing on Anvhar.
Sounds exceedingly dull. If you are all such cool and distant friends, how do babies get made?
Brion felt his ears reddening, not sure if he was being teased or not. The same damn way they get made any place else. But it's not just a reflexive process like a couple of rabbits that happen to meet under the same bush. It's the woman's choice to indicate if she is interested in marriage.
Is marriage the only thing your women are interested in?
Marriage or anything else, that's up to the girl. We have a special problem on Anvhar. Probably the same thing occurs on every planet where the human race has made a massive adaptation. Not all unions are fertile, and there is always a large percentage of miscarriages. A large number of births are conceived by artificial insemination, which is all right when you can't have babies normally. But most women have an emotional bias toward having their husband's children, and there is only one way to find out if this is possible.
Leah's eyes widened. Are you suggesting that your girls see if a man can father children before considering marriage?
Of course. Otherwise Anvhar would have been depopulated centuries ago. Therefore, the woman does the choosing. If she is interested in a man, she says so. If she is not interested, the man would never think of suggesting anything. It's a lot different from other planets, but so is our planet Anvhar. It works well for us, which is the only test that applies.
Just about the opposite of Earth, Leah told him, dropping the apple core into a dish and carefully licking the tips of her fingers. I guess you Anvharians would describe Earth as a planetary hotbed of sexuality. The reverse of your system, and going full blast all the time. There are far too many people there for comfort. Birth control came late and is still being fought, if you can possibly imagine that. There are just too many of the archaic religions still around, as well as crack-brained ideas that have long entrenched in custom. The world's overcrowded. Men, women, children, a boiling mob wherever you look. And all of the physically mature ones seem to be involved in the great game of love. The male is always the aggressor. Not physically, at least not often, and women take the most outrageous kinds of flattery for granted. At parties there are always a couple of hot breaths of passion fanning your neck.
A girl has to keep her spike heels filed sharp." "She has to what?" "A figure of speech, Brion, meaning you fight back all the time if you don't want to be washed under by the flood." "Sounds rather—" Brion weighed the word before he said it, but he could find none other suitable. "Repellent." "From your point of view it would be. I'm afraid we get so used to it that we even take it for granted. Sociologically speaking—" She stopped and looked at Brion's straight back and almost rigid posture. Her eyes widened and her mouth opened in an unspoken "oh" of sudden realization. "I'm being a fool," she said. "You weren't speaking generally at all. You had a very specific subject in mind, namely me." "Please, Lea, you must understand." "But I do," she laughed. "All the time I thought you were being a frigid and hard-hearted lump of ice. You were really being very sweet. Just playing the game in good old Anvharian style, waiting for a sign from me. We'd still be playing by different rules if you hadn't had more sense than I, and finally realized that somewhere along the line we must have got our signals mixed. And I thought you were some kind of frosty off-world celibate." She let her hand go out and her fingers rustled through his hair, something she had been wanting to do for a long time. "I had to," he said, trying to ignore the light touch of her fingers, "because I thought so much of you I couldn't have done anything to insult you, such as forcing my attentions on you, until I began to worry where the insult would lie, since I knew nothing about your planet's mores." "Well, you know now," she said very softly. "The men aggress. Now that I understand, I think I like your way better. But I'm still not sure of all the rules. Do I explain that yes, Brion, I like you so very much? You are more man in one great big wide-shouldered lump than I have ever met before. It's not quite the time or place to discuss marriage, but I would certainly like—" His arms were around her, holding her to him. Her hands clasped him and their lips sought each other's in the darkness. "Gently," she whispered. "I bruise easily."
End of chapter 12.